So we will going to start. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Paulina Rodriguez, and I'd like to welcome you today to the webinar organized by the Center for Global Higher Education. Today's presentation is titled Measuring and Applying the Idea of the Common Good in Higher Education, the Case of Mexico. Before we begin, I'd like to share just a few quick notes with you. The presentation is being recorded, and the recording will be on the website after the event. We will have a Q&A session just by the end of the presentation. Please use the chat function to post your questions during the session. We will be addressing the questions in an order that they were received. To speak, please unmute yourself to share your questions. We will begin by addressing questions in the order that was posted on the chat. I already said that. Okay, I will hand over to my colleague, Gonzalo, who will have the pleasure to introduce to our speaker today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gonzalo Hidalgo, and it's a real pleasure to introduce Dr. Pedro Flores Crespo. He's a lecturer and researcher at the Universidad Autónoma de Querétaro. His work focuses on education policy analysis and the relationship between higher education and human development. He has held several international positions, including visiting scholar at Harvard University, the University of York here in the UK, and the Fundación Pablo VI in Spain. He also served as network coordinator for the Human Development and Capability Association. Currently, Pedro is co-leading the project, The Futures of Education, in collaboration with other universities across Central America. And in Mexico, he has contributed to advisory committees within the Ministry of Education and played a key role in the drafting of the country's new higher education law. His latest book is Why Education Policy Failed, where he analyzed the shortcomings of education policy in Mexico. Today, Dr. Flores Crespo will be speaking about the idea of common good in higher education. So very welcome, Pedro. The floor and the screen is yours.
Oh, thank you very much, Gonzalo and Paulina. I would like to thank also David Mills for his kind invitation to the Oxford Center for Global Higher Education. Thanks also to the people you are attending here, the seminar, those following online. I hope we can have an insightful discussion on how the concept of the common good in education can help us design more effective public policies in this runaway world. And to do so, I have divided the presentation into three main parts. In the first, I will explain why the concept of the common good may advance the idea of public good. According to Charles Hess and Elinor Ostrom, the more people use knowledge, the more the common good grows. The key question, however, is how such knowledge is created, not only regulated within our educational system and ultimately in our universities. The second part of this talk focuses on empirical aspect. In 2020, a research team launched a study to try to measure the common good in 9 Mexican universities for public and private. In Mexico, as you may know, the main distinction is that the public university charge relatively low tuition, whereas private institutions impose very high direct costs, such as also in Chile, I suppose. It's important to note that the fee variation doesn't necessarily correlate with education quality. In fact, most public higher education institutions in Mexico did in scientific research and cultural activities, unlike many private ones. In the final part of the presentation, I will discuss how our research findings will inform public policy making, and I will argue that using the idea of common good encourages institutions to focus not only on outcomes, but also on internal educational process. So a conceptual renovation may enhance existing metrics for assessing the quality of higher education. In other words, academic processes matter, not just the results. Okay, let's start with the first section, education as a public good and common good. As you may know, the idea of the common good in education has become topical. International organizations like UNESCO have proposed framing education as a common good to distinguish knowledge from a mere commodity. If higher education is seen as a commodity, only those with purchasing power can have access to it, and the market regulates supply and demand. From this perspective, public funding is restricted as education becomes a private good and tuition fees policies are justified. But as a result of this policy, many young people from disadvantaged backgrounds are excluded. In Mexico, only 44% of the total population age 18 to 22 years old is attending a university. On the other hand, to prevent people from exclusion, education in general, and higher education in particular, can be viewed as a public good. Following Samuelson's concept of public good, Simon Marginson notes that goods are public when market-based production cannot generate a profit because the goods concerned are not exclusive and not rivalrous. What does it mean? That public goods must benefit all, and their use by one person doesn't reduce their ability to others. As we can see, how we define a good, private, public, or common, has deep implications for public policies. If university degrees are considered private goods, individuals must pay for them because they provide personal benefits. On the other hand, if higher education is viewed as a public good, the benefits extend beyond the individual dimension, requiring public funding to reach diverse social groups. And in this case, states, rather than market, regulate the educational provision. But when we speak of education as a common good, we span the conversation. Not only the state and the market, but also communities regulate the knowledge production. Elinor Ostrom emphasized that common goods are created by communities. Even though UNESCO has proposed replacing public good with common good, the two notions overlap, as Marginson rightly observes. Public education as a common good must be publicly funded to expand access and ensure that education remains a universal right. Where is the innovation? When, I will argue, when using and applying the term common to education, two issues deserve further discussion. First, the question of acknowledged productions. Since the notion of the common good is relational, according to Matsukato, we must ask not only how states and markets regulate education, but also how knowledge is created, managed, and governed within a specific community. Our research helped to explore exactly this, how universities, communities organize themselves to produce knowledge within a particular setting, and we used 9 Mexican universities as a case study. We call this approach the internal notion of common good, which is different from assessing what higher education institutions produce or create globally. This distinction matters since some authors have suggested that higher education could be one key to evolving a global common good approach, as Simon Marginson notes. International cooperation between scientists can foster the creation of global knowledge across distances. Second, we must consider the role of individuals within this approach, an issue normally missed when education is seen as a common good. Some authors may assume that the term common and individuals are opposing. See, for instance, the critique of Michael Sandel on meritocracy in the US. But education benefits both individuals and society before, during, and after the educational process. If knowledge generates impacts beyond the personal sphere, therefore, subsidizing higher education is fair. Universities do more than prepare students for the labor market and to obtain an income. And this is only a small but very important effect of knowledge acquisition. But education, as you may know, also cultivates citizenship, critical thinking, and other non-material outcomes, such as the freedom to reason freely, as Martha Nussbaum, Marginson, and his followers have argued. In short, one thing is the impact of education on individuals, nationally or globally, and another quite different is how individuals are situated in the common good approach. The impact of education is one question, an empirical one. How do we measure individual and collective outcomes? But there is also an ontological perspective, that is, how are individuals doing in the common good approach? In promoting common good, individuality doesn't vanish. It's rather the opposite, as Ostrom showed and our research confirms. Common goods are mediated by the different and diverse individual rationalities. Now let's move on to the second part of my presentation, what was research. The main purpose of our empirical research project was to construct a proxy for the common good using 9 Mexican universities as case studies. Our criteria for selection were mainly regional, institutional, and practical. 8 were located in Querétaro, my home state. 3 were technological-oriented organizations, and 5 out of 9 were private religious-based institutions. We wanted to understand how a university community might create common good through their daily and institutional relationships among students, teachers, and administrative staff. According to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, common good refers to those facilities that the members of a community provide to all members in order to fulfill a relational obligation they all have to care for interests they have in common. As we can see in this definition, this definition implies 1, cooperation, 2, common goals that are pursued rationally, social group called obligation, and relationship between individuals. Matsukato likewise confirmed that the concept of the common good is relational. So following this line of reasoning, we identify 2 core relationships in our research project. The first is the teaching relationship, related to how education is delivered in a university. And the second is the research relationship concerned with how scientific knowledge is produced. Once these relationships were identified, they were operationalized into 5 key dimensions: human agency, institutional stability, governance, fairness, and human flourishing. Each dimension was observed empirically by surveying a probabilistic sample of students, teachers, and administrative staff. The questionnaire was applied online, and it included 76 questions using the Likert scale, and an item of reliability was used. So we gathered over 5,000 valid responses, which is a considerable amount of information, and this made analysis very, very complicated, and we're struggling with this. For this reason, your feedback will be very, very useful indeed. What did we find? Structural models show that this is the reliability test for those who are interested in the technical stuff. I'm not that good in technical stuff, but my colleagues are. The structural model showed that human agency was positively related to 3 dimensions of common good: fairness, institutional stability and governance, and ultimately to human flourishing. This means that without the freedom to pursue what one value and has the reason to value, the common good cannot emerge. In other words, individuality and the common good are not opposites. Rather, they are linked closely. For where structural models could show a close and positive relationship between variables with some reliability, they tell us little about individuals or how individuals are doing within a structure or within a community. So as we can see in this chart, human agencies vary among university and by gender. And let me explain briefly this chart. The x-axis shows the university that were selected for the research. And in this chart, as you can see, there are 8 out of 9 universities because my home university was excluded because we couldn't reach enough respondents, and therefore its sample was not representative of the total population. The y-axis represents the proportion of replies in terms of agency. The boxes, the pink ones and the blue ones, represent the interquartile range, that is the numbers that are above the lowest 25% and below the top 25%. In short, the boxes, the blue ones and the pink ones, concentrate 50% of the gathered responses. Within the boxes, as you can see here, a red dot that stands for the mean, and black horizontal line that represents the median. The former, as you know, is an average number, while the latter is the middle point of the data set. Using the interquartile ranges made the data more comparable among universities and the measurement of common good more accessible. The point here is that agency, the human agency, varies significantly between institutions and by gender. One private religious-oriented university called Geneva, which is in the middle of the chart, as you can see, scored lowest on agency, especially among women, and gender matters. When comparing overall common good, this private university again performed poorly, as you can see in this chart. And this university is represented by the yellow box, which is also in the middle of the chart. I would like to comment on additional point on this chart. Firstly, as it was anticipated, the aggregated measure of common good varied across university, and this means that what each higher education produces internally may result from its own institutional processes. If this is true, let's raise a question. Could it be that each university has a variable degree of quality that correlates with its level of common good, regardless of outcomes? Again, could it be that each university has a variable degree of quality that correlates with its level of common, regardless of outcomes? In order to support this point, have a look at this chart, especially on the, I think it's the purple box that represents my home university. My home university didn't score highest in common good, and it's the most prestigious university of the sample. So the Autonomous University of Querétaro scored relatively low mean in terms of common good in comparison with those of the other higher education institutions. And despite strong academic output, my home university showed relatively weak internal relationships. In other words, common good doesn't relate directly and positively to outcomes. And this confirms what Charles Hess and Elinor Ostrom has said. A commons is not value laden. Its outcome can be good or bad, sustainable or not. This is why, according to these authors, we do need understanding and clarity skilled decision-making abilities, and cooperative management strategies in order to ensure durable and robust system. And this is a normative point of view that suggests that mainstream methods for measuring the quality of education tend to focus more on outcomes than on processes, even though both may be related. By paying close attention to how university agents interact, teaching and research relationship can be modified. This is our argument. And through this, the common good can be expanded. This approach may serve as an alternative and complementary metric for evaluating the performance of higher education institutions. So I will argue that the quality of institutional processes matter, not just outputs or mainstream performance indicators. As a way to explore the institutional settings where this process takes shape, we evaluated the perception of the common good by different university agents, and in some cases, the variations were striking, as you can see in this chart. Let me highlight 3 points from this slide. First, in 4 out of 5 private universities, the value of common good, as reported by students, is lower than that reported by academic and administrative staff. And this result is especially surprising in the university called UPIEP, whose mission explicitly focuses on the common good approach, and is a religious-based institution. Second, in 5 out of 9 institutions, the value of the common good expressed by academic staff is lower than that expressed by the administrative staff. And this raises an important question: who governs our universities? Scientific communities, teachers, or political bureaucracies in Mexico? Third, in 3 public technological universities, students report higher levels of common good than teachers and administrative staff. And this finding is very relevant because these students from the technological university come normally from relatively disadvantaged backgrounds. All these variations may be explained by the differences in the institutional settings where the members of the university interact on a daily basis. And these interactions are the basis for the creation of knowledge. Universities play a clear role in the process by organizing their communities to re-examine existing information, cultivate independent thinking in young people, and foster free expression in the pursuit of truth. Higher education institutions could contribute significantly to the global common good, but only if they first understand how they function internally, especially in today's complex and rapidly changing world. Okay, let's conclude. The study of the common good in higher education is worldwide because, as Hess and Ostrom argue, knowledge is not subtractive. That is, the more people use it, the more the common good grows. The concept of the common good in education enhances that of the public good in at least 2 ways. Firstly, it shifts focus toward how knowledge is created, not just how it's regulated and distributed. And this is not an epistemological question, but is an institutional point of view. Secondly, since the concept of the common good is relational, it demands a better understanding of how members of a university community interact or organize themselves to produce specialized knowledge collectively, nationally, or globally. This means that the institutional process matter, not only mainstream performance indicators. Improving institutional quality may therefore depend on how members of a university community act, relate, and organize themselves on a daily basis, not just on how much they produce by the end of the academic year. This conceptual shift is relevant because a renovated approach to the policymaking process can emerge from it. Individuals, and common good are not opposites, rather than deeply interconnected, and our empirical analysis confirms this. Academic freedom is a key component of the common good, and this helps to say that elected governments should not interfere with what university has reasonably established as its normative framework. They must ensure public funding, but also institutional freedom to achieve quality of education and to expand the common good. So to conclude, I will argue that individuals flourish in groups, in collectivities, within a specific institutional settings, and with a little help from my friends, as the Beatles used to sing, creating with a lovely music a common good that is valued globally. Thank you very much for your attention, and I will be very happy to take your questions, criticism, and suggestions. Thank you very much for inviting me.
We would like to thank you, Pedro, for this really fascinating presentation. I will start with a comment.
Excellent.
I'm really fascinated by this view that the process matters. So I wanted to have your reflections in terms of what do you think in terms of policies. So I think we can think that most of education policies are outcome-oriented policies, focused on manipulating, for example, levels like regulations and fundings to achieve a specific measurable goals. But based on your discussion, I think we can think on process policies seeking to shape the underlying dynamics of change. So, for example, fostering human agency. However, their subtle and often long-term impacts might pose challenges in terms of agency and regulatory bodies. So I wonder about your views on advancing toward this type of paradigm or more like a process-oriented policies, and what would be required in terms of regulatory agency. They typically demand, this would require like a tolerance for complexity, for messiness, for long-term change, rather than specific outcomes. What type of approaches do you think it would be useful to count for accountability, considering that outcome policies most normally focus on incentives that are typically geared toward tangible, short-term outcomes, rather than the more gradual and less predictable shift that a process policy might entail. So I wonder if you can share your thoughts.
Oh, thank you, Paulina, for your insightful points. First of all, I will say that we need more empirical work on how human agency is related to outcomes. That's the first thing that I will say. I think we need to conduct more empirical studies on this, and there's a strong basis for that. And the second is that the government and regularity or offices should understand that academic freedom from the old times have been related to knowledge production. And it seems to me that nowadays, especially in Mexico and Latin America, the governments try to direct research agendas in order to meet the national goals of the national development, which is a very central, vertical, and sometimes very authoritarian ways to approach universities and scientific centers. I think that's is happening in Mexico, and because there's another idea that you need to ensure that higher education need to be matched with the requirements of the society, but the requirements of the society are fixed by the government, not by the communities or the scientific communities, and we need to be aware of that.
I have another question, but I also want to invite the people in the online to write your question in the Q&A section, and we can take them, or you can also unmute and ask if you want. My question is about the concept of common good, and I think that is we are in a crucial moment to discuss about the common good of higher education. And especially thinking on what I perceive that, well, I perceive that higher education is under attack, and I'm thinking on the US mainly and what is happening there, where the attack of EDI efforts, diversity initiatives, but also even student activism, and which, in my opinion, are crucial for the common good of higher education. And the problem that I see is that that attack is coming from government, which is supposed to be the producer of common good. But I'm at the same time, I'm afraid that that kind of government attacking the university can produce a reaction on universities of going full private, for example, or going or trying to detach from the state in some way. So how do you see the possibilities of the challenges of the discussion of common good in the current scenario, and mainly thinking on that in many cases this attack to the university is also coming together with a discourse that very instrumentalist around the role of higher education. So how do you see the possibilities and challenges of the discussion of common good in this context, and how much these discourses or attacks to the higher education that is happening in the US, but probably in other contexts as well, is infiltrating the Mexican case?
Yeah, I think I take the first point about the relevance of education. Who said that higher education or university is relevant? And if you ask the employers, they would say one thing. If you ask students, they would say another thing. And if you ask the government, it's probably they would say another thing. So I think academic communities, in Mexico, we have autonomy, university autonomy, and needs the capacity to organize ourselves in our universities. And I think need for trust is necessary for the academic communities. That's the first thing. The second thing is when you conceptualize education as a common good, I think in some extent its instrumental role is complemented with its intrinsic value of education. And I think this is very, very important. This is a positive shift in conceptual terms, because in the past, I can say in Mexico, the university was seen very, very instrumental in economic terms. So the higher education institution should fulfill the demands of labor market or industrial requirements. That, I think the instrumental role can be complemented with intrinsic value of education. And this is this is a matter for the philosophers of education. What is education for? So the big question is that, and it's still being that on the table. So we need to address that question within specific academic communities, within the university communities, and with trustworthiness by the government. And the government is interfering in Mexico, at least the universities, with a subtle idea of change. That's a problem, because nobody criticized that position, that governmental position, because it's a subtle way to interfere in universities, such as let's make more democratic the academic campus or the university campus. Let's make more efficient in terms of transparency the universities, and then you interfere in the government bodies. So it's a subtle way of interfering, and that's what we are facing now, at least in Mexico. And it's very risky. And it seems to me the Academic Freedom Index, which was measured by, I think it's a German university in Mexico, has decreased from 90%, 0.90 to 0.60% in 4 years on 6 years. So I think it's a bit worth. Yeah. Thank you very much, Gonzalo, for your questions, and let's take some questions from the floor, from the people who is behind or.
Thank you very much for facility sharing. And my question is about the conceptualization of the common good beyond the intrinsic value. And I wonder if, because there are the tensions between the national public goods or the common goods, because like in the US conditions, the reduction of the DI fundings and the cutting off the public funding for several universities opposed to the Trump's recent the control of the academic freedom, which shows the tensions between the national interest and the academic autonomy. But this action is not only influenced American national scale, but also influence the global landscape of the higher education. And America may face the brain drain and losing the international students. And so I wonder how to maybe enrich the political economic perspective into the conceptualization of the common goods, considering the global order or more stable global higher education landscape. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for your comment. It seems to me that there are some promising concepts such as common good, but that concepts need to be operationalized in order to work for reality. And this is what we are doing in this project, the research team was doing, to try to make the concept work in the reality. And we hope to move forward in terms of public policies. And one of them is how to prevent government from interfering the academic communities. So let's see.
We have a question in the chat. Naureen Jasmine, do you want to unmute and ask the question?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hello?
Yes.
Oh, thank
Yeah,
you.
we can
Thank
hear you.
Thanks for initiating this discussion. My question is how the concept of higher education as common good is affecting equitable access and the public mission of universities in Mexico, if there is any such example of any such impact.
I think the concept reinforces the capacity of the academic communities to organize themselves. But that means a responsibility. And as George Bernard Shaw, the great writer, the British great writer, said, why people have a fear from liberty, say, because it implies responsibility. So if we want to move on, if we want to construct our capacity to organize themselves, we need to be responsible of that. And it seems to me that that's an internal reflection in the home universities on the Mexican universities that we have to take very seriously, how to be accountable for the things that we are doing. So if we want to achieve more freedom, we need to be more accountable. And I'm not sure that we are in the right direction or that we are working in that track. It seems to me that it's very difficult because we don't have incentives, external incentives to become accountable. And that's one of the main tasks of the governments, to try to provide and to ensure that academic communities or the university have the freedom to flourish. And that could be a question about the regularity or the regulation agencies to try to ensure, to try to figure out what are the academic freedoms that need to be ensured in order to enhance what the people are designing themselves within the community. Yeah, but trust is also needed. Otherwise, yeah, and well, trust is it's a big question in some academic communities. Yeah.
I don't know if there is another question in the online audience, please, you can raise your hand or put it in the chat, or just unmute and intervene.
Or write me later, or we would like to have encouraged.
I have another question. Or you have another one?
I have another one. Yeah, I think it was really interesting that professional services or managers really score high on common good. And I wonder, yeah, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, first of all, it varied from university to one university to others. For example, in case of my university, which is the public university, seems to me that the bureaucracies still working or are in good shape in my universities, which is not relative. I mean, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it seems to me that they have more powerful than teachers or scholars or scientific researchers. And this could be explained by the history of each institution. In my home university, deans and the vice chancellor are elected by popular votes, for example. So seems to me that the amount of the responses or the percentage of the responses are explained by the history of each university, and that this could be explained by this kind of practices that we have to appoint people in my home university. So an historical analysis will be complement the empirical results. Yeah, it's true. Yeah, but it is a good point, and it was thank you very much for raising that point, because it's necessary to say there's a historical background in universities. Yeah, that explains the results.
There is another question from Magali Ramos. She's doing the PhD on higher education access in Ecuador at the University of Cambridge. And she's with, I understand that she's with poor signal now, so probably I'm gonna read the question.
Okay.
She asked, what were the challenges of implementing the concept of common goods into higher education?
Well, we haven't implemented the concept of common good, at least in our universities, but it's becoming topical. And I think the international organization and even the government is speaking of common good, but they don't have disentangled what does it mean. They don't have explained what does it mean. And I think the first challenge, Magali, is to try to understand the concept in a comprehensive way. And I think that's the first step. And the second, I think it goes to try to ask the government to be friendly to the universities in a good way, at least in Mexico. And this is getting very, very difficult indeed in recent days because of the government and because of the academic communities too. As I said, we need to be more accountable and responsible for what we are doing. And we, as and Elinor Ostrom, we need that skill framework to make decisions and responsible ways or accountable ways to do the things within the universities. We don't. I mean, we are some ways we are not enough transparent in many ways, and we are not the things or we are not meeting the expectation that society have about universities, and we need to work more forward to accomplish that point. Yeah.
We have another question, I think, from Chayla Alvarez.
Hi, thank you so much. I love to listen to Dr. Flores Crespo. He has always brought light like for me, and I don't always share his ideas or the ideas he has. Nevertheless, he is one of the few that we have to give us like paths. So the question in this sense, it goes like this. Sometimes government gave us like to the universities like a kind of budget or invest on us, and they ask us to tell how are we going to spend those. Okay. And sometimes it's very it hurts when we notice that in a very, very far away that is not my university, they spend amounts, big amounts, for instance, in gifts or in chocolates or in some other, I don't know, like I will say ornaments. And researchers and teachers, we have to put from our own pocket. So in that way, how can we as researchers and as teachers can handle those situations in order to make the budget clear for all?
Thank you, Sheila. I think there are 2 points implied in your question. The first is, I think the concept of the common good or education as a common good is a good reason to fight for public funding, because it has a different impacts, not only pecuniary, as Simon Marginson says, but also non-pecuniary outcomes of education. So if we consider education as a common good, it needs to be publicly funded because it's worldwide. And this is the first thing. And the second, as you said, well, as you mentioned, we need to be more transparent and more effective in the management of the public funding within the universities. And that's a real problem in Mexico, at least. And, but I'm a bit, well, I would like that an external incentive could be complemented with a reflective approach within the communities, that we need to be more effective in terms of transparency, not to try to wait for the external incentives that the government usually impose on public universities to become accountable. So we need to work much more, and we need to do more within the universities, within our groups of colleagues, students, and administrative staff. Trade unions in Mexico are very powerful within the university, by the way.
We have, I think, Magali that want to make another question, and also someone is asking if we can leave the presentation in the conceptual framework because they wanted to. Hi, Magali.
Hello.
Thank you for connecting.
She's driving. Take care, Magali.
No, thank you so much, Professor. It's been very enlightening listening to you. And I think my question was more geared towards the literature of the commons from Ostrom. It is usually seen as literature that's related to, for example, natural resource management, natural resources. It is unusual to find it in higher education. I think that's a bit what I meant when the challenges of bringing that theory or that concept to higher education. Education. Sorry.
So I can't hear you. So I didn't get your question. Could you please repeat it again? Could you please repeat it?
Yes, and I said that it is unusual to find the commons research in higher education. So
Yeah.
the challenge, Elinor Ostrom's.
Yeah, I
Yes.
think a splendid book, which was published in 2007, written by Elinor Ostrom and Charles Hess, that is untitled "Acknowledge as a Common Good," something like that. But the reference is in, I think it's in the slide. So you can have a look at, because they move from, as you said, from natural resources examples to the education. So it was a very good move, and one of the most striking arguments from that is, as you use it, as the you more use it, acknowledge the common good grows, which is quite different from other goods. The example is being here. So the common good is expanding, as you can hear, discuss, and use the knowledge in order to understand what is happening. So I think the nature of the knowledge is I think is very peculiar and very particular in terms of, and this is why we need more empirical studies. I think hope so we can work together on an empirical project about that. Yeah. Thank you, Magali. Write carefully.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's keep in touch.
Rashmi, do you want to?
Yes, definitely. I'll send an email.
Okay.
Professor, thank you.
I will be in Cambridge. You said you're in Cambridge.
There is another question.
I'm doing my PhD in Cambridge. Thank you.
Yeah, I will be there on the 8th.
Sadly, I'm in Ecuador doing some data collection, but let's definitely keep in touch, Professor. Thank you so much.
Thanks to you.
There's another question from Rashmi. Do you want to make your question?
Yes, hello. Hello, and thank you so much, Professor. I just quickly wanted to ask, my area of work is actually school education and secondary education, but I was also looking at, in my doctoral thesis, looking at the transition and the pathways towards seeking higher education, but also really reflecting on the agency of adolescents and how they're changing the decision-making patterns of the families with respect to what should be the pathways in the higher education. In that context, I really wanted to look at if the nature of the education really alters in the even in the discourse within the family level, whether they remain as a commodity, whether they transit into becoming a common good in the interactive spaces. And then would you like to really share something that you've already written with regard to what you have presented today, or some reflections that I would like to hear from you? Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think I will comment on the directional about education and human agency, and what is the impact of people who is involved in educational processes in terms of human agency. And there are few empirical works about it, even though that the classics and many authors, such as Paulo Freire, such as many, Martha Nussbaum, have argued about the impact of education on human agency. But we need to do more empirical work about it. In some extent, it seems to me that the human agency is not an explicit purposes of the education. I mean, at least in the curriculums, in the national curriculum. Even in Mexico, it doesn't phrase like that. We don't use the term, in Latin America, we don't use much the term human agency. And I always ask my students, why is that? Because I think we come from another epistemological tradition, which is more structural, even neo-Marxist epistemologies or theories. But we, with focusing on the human agency, I think you have a big possibilities as a teacher to do more things within the classrooms, because you have an idea there how the people could act. Don't judge people when they are acting or behaving, but understanding why are they acting or behaving in the way and not in the other. I think this is very promising in terms of the human development, especially from the little ones, not only from young people or youngsters, which is where my research has focused on today. But I think we need more focus on the human freedoms on little ones and primary school students and secondary school students. Yeah. Thank you. I don't know if I reply or.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I think we have time for the last question. So please raise your hand or put it in the chat. Well, I can go probably with the last with the last one. And I think probably it's a very old question. It's a very old discussion, but you have mentioned like the need that institutions need to be accountable of what they are doing, but also need to be autonomous and trying to keep their distance from government and the intervention of governments in their academic life. And I'm sure that the Universidad Autónoma de Querétaro is a prestigious and big public university where there are many others in Latin America that have a long tradition, and probably they have their own systems of accountability after a long tradition they are so complex. So probably there are some kind of regulations, self-regulation between the different groups, different faculties.
That's true.
But in Latin America, we also have seen like the emergence of new institutions where the common good is not being the main north guiding their activities. And there are some cases in Chile, like very dramatic, about private private universities. Like even though in Chile is not the profit is not allowed, but they have different ways to profit. So how this autonomy and self regulation works together with being accountable is I know that it's a long discussion, but how do you see it?
No, it's an excellent question because it's a complex one, and I think I couldn't answer that question, but I would say that highlights the institutional need that we have to try to make compatible the autonomy of our universities and a new ways to become more accountable. But we need to discuss within the universities, following the mainstream literature about it, and trying to promote institutional change, and to try to promote in promoting institutional change, we need to have the freedom to put it in practice. So there are many things that are implied in that move. But one is much more intellectual and institutional, and the other is more in terms of regulation and the government intervention, which is in Latin America, the intervention of the state, and more recently, it's very strong. Yeah. Thank you very much, Gonzalo. And in compensation for your question, I have a question for you that comes from Chile. Are they more prestigious, the private universities in Chile, or the public ones are more prestigious? I mean, who leads the scientific discussion? Or
there is like a group of public and all universities that are the one more prestigious, because all public are not necessarily all of them state universities. The Catholic ones have like a long history, more than 100 years, and they are part of the public discussion. It's a long discussion as well, what is public and what is not, but But there are a group of universities that are being, and they have like an association of universities that belong to this most prestigious group. And there are some of the newest one, post 81, which are being gaining some prestigious as well. But I think there are two main universities that are in general the most prestigious one, and one is a Catholic one, and the other is the state one, the University of Chile.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you very much.
Just being mindful of the time, I'd like to thank you, Pedro, for this very stimulating conversation, and to you all for joining us today. I hope you have a good rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.